So we are on page AyinBase 12, about a third down the page. The line starts with the word hayom. We have quite an extensive discussion on the principle. Essentially, the focus, the question that triggers the whole discussion is, how can there be such a term? It's called Adam kadmon. Kadmon means original, not created. Adam is a creation. And the principle of the answer is that yes, indeed, it's a creation, but it's a creation that stays connected to its source. And this principle of it being connected to its source is not an external connection. By definition, its own orientation is the fact that it is related to the source and what it gets from the source. This is why it qualifies to be called Adam kadmon, because what it actually relates to is to the kadmon element. Like we explained, kadmon means that in everything, that which initiates it, not that which promotes its existence, but the initial principle that conceptualizes it, that is the real, that is its reality. Except that when it goes down into the mitzias, into the world, it loses that significance and becomes involved in its own mitzias. This is what happens even in kedushin, in kelim, but in the world it happens in a completely different, on a very low level. But oir, and anything that qualifies as oir, has this sense that it senses its mocker, and it is completely defined itself by its mocker, by its sense of its mocker, rather than by its own mitzias. To the extent that we had this moshel, that physical light, sunlight, ultimately it's called daylight, oir hayom. Daylight, the real meaning of daylight, what creates daylight, not light, but the source of light. Sun is what gives the effect of daylight. Not sunlight, but sun. And as we explained it, because sun is the essence of light. Meaning to say that inside sun, darkness does not even, not only doesn't exist, but the concept of darkness doesn't exist. The possibility of darkness doesn't exist. And that is what's transmitted in daylight, in day. Day is not light. Day is a period of day. This is what the Pasuk says, Vayikra Elokim, Vayim Elokim, Hi Oir, Vahi Oir, Vayikra Elokim Lo Oir, Yoim. What's the significance of that? Oir means a functional light. Ultimately, Vayikra Elokim Lo Oir, Yoim, he says, no, this is not a functional light. This light reveals an essential light. And that's why it deserves a name of its own. Not a functional name, but as a presence. This is what we are struggling. This is that's being revealed over here. That by being connected, dovuk, being koiroi, and I'm repeating myself, connected does not mean an external connection. Even light of a candle is also connected to the fire, but it becomes a mitzvah on its own. Connected means that its own sense of its own self is the fact that it is the way it is in the source. It's not connected. Doesn't have any self-identity otherwise other than that. This was described, I said, to a great degree, because it has many different misholim and all kinds of different elements. And now we are on the line that begins hayom. This is about a third from the top of the page, AyinBase 12. At the end of that line, after all these misholim of fire and light and so forth, the similar inyan who bebechinas ha'oir lamayla is in the aspect of oir lamayla above, in kedusha, in alakus. Elukus, everything that exists is created by God and by godliness. And yet, when we look at the world, we hardly can identify it and relate it to godliness, saying it's more or less. But so this comes later on to say the Hishtalshalos. But initially, in the Lakus Lamayla, in the Oir Leki Lamayla, even though it's an Oir, but that Oir remains connected to the source, and that's why it's Oir. This way it says, Bechinas Ha'oir Lamayla, Kumoi Bechinas HaChochma. As, for example, Bechinas HaChochma, the aspect of Chochma, Shenikra Chayohi, which is called Chayohi. Chayohi, the expression in the Zohar is Ihu B'Chayohi and Ihu B'Garmohi. Chayohi is Bechinas Oir. Let me just translate this on a superficial level. The Zohar says that in Atzilus, Ihu b'chayei echad, Ihu b'garmoi echad. Ihu means he, which means Atzvus. V'chayohi, chayohi means in his life, which means the life element that emanates from it, is chad, is one. And then he says even further, Ihu b'garmoi echad, garmoi means the cleaving, and also chad. But Chochma particularly refers to the union of Oir, because that's what Chochma relates to. And therefore, Chochma is Oir, Hayeh. So, although Chochma is a definitive presence, when it says V'Chochma me'ayin timotzi, that Chochma me'ayin timotzi comes forth from Ayin. What does it mean? It comes forth from Ayin. Comes forth from Ayin means that it is not in itself Ayin. It comes forth from Ayin. Shenimtzas, which means that it comes forth me'ayin, from the Ayin bebchinas yesh, in the aspect of yesh. In other words, it is a creation. True, it is rooted in the Ayin, but then it comes forth b'bchinas yesh as a presence, as a yesh. Hopefully, at this point, we have a sense of what is the significance of saying Ayin and Yesh. But I'll kind of discuss it very briefly. Everything is rooted in Atzmus. What's Atzmus? Atzmus is not a what. Like we said all along, in Atzmus there is no such thing as Oir. There is no element in Atzmus that you could say, okay, I can tell you what I am. Like in the sun, we say, there is oil in the sun because the sun is light, and therefore I can tell you what I am. By oil, I can tell you what I am. I'm light. The nefesh is an essence of a living essence. Therefore, I can tell you what I am by demonstrating, by manifesting in of life. Atzmus does not have any kind of a quality that can be demonstrated and say, oh, that's what it is. This is what we said originally, all the way back in the previous Maimon. The meaning of oil doesn't exist in Atzmus. Because there's nothing to reveal, nothing to express. Anything that you attribute, anything that is definitive, is not Atzmus. Chochma may Ayin timotze. Chochma is rooted in this Ayin. In discussing this, we always resort back to the inyan of Chochmah as it is manifest on the physical level, sight. We point out, if you touch something, you know there is something there because you feel it, you grasp it. I have a reason to say it's there because it has an effect. Sight has no effect. There is no explanation to the phenomenon of sight. What makes it so convincing that it's there? It's just there. It doesn't have an effect upon you. It's not something that affects your present, and therefore you personally know that it's there. You don't personally know. Sight tells you that the object is there because the object screams out, I'm here, not because you experience it. You see the object not because you experience it, but because you cannot possibly deny it. Now, but you see its own truth. This is the meaning of sight. This is why sight is so profoundly effective, beyond even touch, beyond any other experience. Because everything speaks to you in terms of what the effect of this object is, what its qualities it has. Sight does not relate to qualities. It relates to reality. There's no explanation. Essentially, ultimately, when you say, I know, because I've seen it, therefore I know it, there's no explanation how I know it. I just know it. This is the meaning from Chochmah. Chochmah knows the truth because it knows the truth, not because it knows it and it knows how come I know it. Not a personal experience, like in every other level. And this is what the pasuk says: "HaChochma mei Ayin." The original point of Chochma is Ayin, but Chochma draws this Ayin timotzei into a mitzias, into a presence, which means in Chochma, this is we call it time. Chochma is the sememutza. Chochma gives a represents the Ayin in a presence form, on the presence level. And because it represents the Ayin in a presence level, therefore it becomes the foundation. It enables Bina to focus in on the presence element of the Chochmah. What is it that I saw? But the Chochmah itself is a phenomenal lineage. It actually tells you about the Ayin itself. In other words, what we perceive in Chochmah doesn't allow any questions as to how come it's there, how do you know it's there. I just know it because the Rebbe gave me the capability of knowing it. Just one more step in this. Since everything by Yas is mislabish in the goof and the physical and the physical arena, physical level. On the physical level, if there are two things, and one thing knows of the other thing, there has to be some means by which they connect, by which they affect each other, and therefore I know of this presence, because they're two separate entities. There is no, in the physical, there's no such thing as uniting on the pneumistic level. Each thing remains a mitzias, and I know of this other mitzias because of the effect that it has upon me. That's the way it is in physical. In Ruchnis, in Chochmah, that's exactly what happens. Chochmah knows what it knows as an insider, not as an outsider. Even though it is an outsider, it's observing it. But because of the beetle, and because of its key of its chabras to the etzem, it knows things as an insider. This is bringing back to the question, the initial question. Odom kadmon. How can it be kadmon if it's an odom? It is that this odom knows itself as a kadmon, as an insider, not as an outsider, even though he is in fact an outsider. Because of the beetle, because of the iskarbos, of the chibur. This is what he says over here. Chochma mei Ayin. Chochma initially is from Ayin, but timotzei, he comes into a form of mitzias. Mei Ayin b'bchinas yesh. From Ayin into the b'china of yesh. What is the b'china of yesh? B'china of yesh means that now it can be observed, so to speak, from outside. Like a spark. Say, Chochmah comes forth as right in Borag HaMavrik. That's the yesh of Chochmah. Borag HaMavrik, a spark, doesn't exist, doesn't stand on its own. It has a fleeting existence. From the moment that it is produced, completely dependent on the producing element. But for that moment, it's a yesh. It's not an independent yesh, but it's a yesh. This Borag HaMavrik, this is the yesh element of Chochmah, which means that Chochmah initially takes it from the Ayin and brings the Ayin out in the form of yesh. Bring the Ayin out in the form of yesh doesn't give the yesh too much leeway, too much presence. Just alludes to it. That's enough. This is what Borag HaMavrik. Yes.
When you started talking about this Inyan, you were saying how Atzmus does not have any kind of anything
Quality.
in it. So this was alluding to the Ayin elements, right?
Yeah.
So this is how could Chochmah draw from the Ayin to the Yesh? I mean, anything that would come from Atzmus would be purely from the Eibishter's choice, like we learned in last time, right? So there is no or there. He's choosing to bring forth an or, and the whole explanation about the first koyach. So what is Chochmah taking from Ayin and bringing into? There's no taking. There's only what's being initiated by the Eibishter.
Exactly right. And Chochmah says there is an Eibishter. That's already an external statement. Because the whole term is not applicable.
So this is sort of like after that Hashem, so to speak, brought forth the Gilui, shows that now Chochmah stands from a place of Metzias and actually relates to where that Gilui
comes from.
The initiate. Wow. So even though there's absolutely nothing there, even though that, so he relates to that which initiated.
Odom kadmon. Think about it. An Odom that relates and senses the meaning of kadmon. I'm Odom, I never was ever created. I am because I represent the kadmon. And so machshava rishona. Machshava rishona.
This is a deeper pirush in Adam Kadmon than we had last minor. Different, it's a different notch in it.
It's a clearer pirush, it's not a deeper pirush. It's exactly the same. Except that's why he's further elaborating. Chochmah me'ayin timotzish nimtzas me'ayin b'bchinas yesh. I want to point out, because this is something which we are struggling with in our world and in our time. We say emunah is the basis of human thought, the basis of human pursuit, the basis of human life and activity. But then, this emunah is a fleeting thing. There's no basis for it. There's no reality. You believe, so you believe. So therefore, you believe, I have to believe too. What does one have to do with the other? This gives us a sense and an understanding of what we are talking about when we say emunah. Yes, indeed, I don't have a grasp of what the emunah is. But what do I sense in the emunah? I sense in the emunah in kadmon, something which is real beyond creation. This is why it comes in the form of emunah, because it's not something which can be known. But it's an undeniable and an unquestionable reality. That's what emunah brings. This is how this emunah, this chokhmah, enables and brings a person to the principle of mesiras nefesh. Mesiras nefesh, there's nothing left, so what's the point? The reality is in that mesiras nefesh. On a healthy and in an existential level, this is the from Kabbalah soil. It should never be tested with the Mikvayim Mesiras Nefesh, because Kabbalah soil is sufficient of a test. And as the Pasuk says, this is going back to the Ayin Bechinas Yesh. And as we say, Boile Kedoshim. What does Boile Kedoshim mean? Kodesh is what is holy. Kodesh means it's removed from Mitzias. Boile Kedoshim, Boile means a creation. And that's what the Pasuk is exactly saying. Shagam Kedoshim, that even Kedoshim, which means even that which is completely removed from worldliness, Shehem Chochma Ubina, Arehem Bechinas Bria. Chochma Ubina is also Bechinas Bria, is a creation. וכמו שכוסם ליקודי טבע, דיבר המסקר שהבסייסה והביר, בהסחן והביר, ואחרי הוואי. והיינו, okay, the next line. והיינו, and the point in this is, שגם בחינס האוי דחוכמו, מאין תימוצא. That even the oil of Chochmo, not only the Kelev Chochmo, but Chayehu, the oil of Chochmo, is also Me'ayin Timotze, also is also an inyan for Timotze, of a Metzias. Even though this is oil is reflective of the Yetzer. As we explained, oil is reflective of the Yetzer, but it is not an automatic reflection of the Yetzer, because in Yetzer there is no oil. Chochmah draws this oil into Metzias, and that becomes oil. ושרוש במוקים אחר. ובחינס אצילוס, okay, this is the parenthesis here, we're going to be careful in this. בחינס אצילוס שבה אצילוס. Say that Chochmah is in from Atzilus. Atzilus in general is Chochmah. And in that itself, we say Timotze, it's a Bria. Which means that there is a Madrei in Chochmah that can be called Bria, creation. And therefore we explain like this, that in Atzilus, which means in the Chochmah, there's a Madrei called Atzilus Sheba Atzilus. And then there's Bria Sheba Atzilus, and there is Yitzira Sheba Atzilus. Atzilus Sheba Atzilus, Hu Bechinas Ho'er Shalamayla Mikeli. This is the oil which that is above kelim. As is explained elsewhere, that in the oil there are actually three madrigas. In the oil itself there are three madrigas. The first and the highest madriga of oil, as the oil is a part, is included in the matzil elyon, in the matzil of above. The matzil means the one who produces the atzilus, the emanator. Beis, in the second madrega, k'meishin is gala, as the oil is revealed, liyas v'bchinas oil, l'kelim, to become oil for kelim, which means oil that eventually can be nislabesh in kelim. Avol loy nislabesh adayin bekelim, but it is not yet imbued in kelim. It is for kelim, but not in kelim. The gimel and third madrega of mishim mislabesh bekelim, where the oil is already mislabesh in kelim. Okay, but drush gimel minei odom. Because of the chokhmah bechinat atzilus shebatzilus. Okay. So these elements, this is here parenthetically brought down, so we leave it as a parenthetical reminder that there is more to it. And this is the most important point here. This is the focus of the whole discussion. Even though it comes into mitzvah, and boidik deishim, it is like a creation. Nevertheless, the chokhmah b'bchinas dveikus is in a quality, in a state of dveikus. We always explain the b'bchinas, and I want to hear it's very necessary to sense. So chokhmah hi b'bchinas dveikus. There will be a difference if you say chokhmah hi dvuka b'nesoid or b'bchinas dveikus v'alakus. When you say dvuka means that the chokhmah and elusive are two separate things, and the chokhmah is connected. Chokhmah b'bchinas dveikus means that the very internal presence of chokhmah itself is dovuk, not on an external level. The whole mitzvah of chokhmah is in dveikus, in the state of dveikus. Its own identity of itself is dveikus in elukus. Instead of knowing itself and knowing that it's dovuk. B'chinas dveikus means its own awareness of itself is its dveikus to elukus. Well, I'll try. The time is up, but I will just start this thing. Please, I always emphasize in the b'chinas. A human being lives in the world, and in the world there's all kinds of different things. You can choose any kind of profession. You can choose to go front, back, side, up, and in any direction. All of these choices are external choices. There is no sense in the person saying, I choose to be in the world. The principle that he is in the world, and when he considers where he wants to go, is not whether he wants to go to Mars, whether he wants to go right, left, or up and down. that is inherent in his home mitzias.
Saying the Dveikus is inherent in his Matthias?
And Dveikus, right. Dveikus is inherent in Matthias. I just break with it to comment to Mitzvah. The principle of responsibility, of focus, of identity, of reality is inherent in his Matthias. Odom shein lebayis ein odom. It's meant any odom. He hasn't reached a certain... No, ein odom. Oicha b'shuk, dema lekelem. I'm a human being, I'm eating b'shuk. No. You lost your personal identity. This is it for this morning.
To remain.